So there's a very specific reason that I thought we should use that song for meditation today. And it's very much wrapped up in what this talk is about today. Oh, and did you see my little mascot? He's here with me, my little eagle friend. He told me this morning that he wanted to come with me, so he traveled with us through Italy, so he's had some journeys with us before. What I want to talk about and why the song was important is that I wanted to, when Christina and I first talked about scheduling a time for this talk, there were several dates that didn't work out, and it ended up being today, which at the time when we scheduled it was going to be one of the last services that we were going to have in this space. So the inspiration was to look at the journey that I've taken in this spiritual family while we were looking at a time of transition. And we are still obviously looking at that time of transition. And when I went back and sat with the idea, I was like, well, no, this is still what we need to do. So you all have been so much a part of this journey for me of when I first came to Unity and where I am now, and the difference between those two people, which is a huge difference, that I really wanted to take that journey with you in this way through poetry. And why the song is important, it's so interesting how things play out. The song is important because it was the first thing that really drew me to Unity principles. I heard it first in Savannah at the Unity Church there when I lived there in 1994. And the interesting part is that Dana and Christine attended that church. I didn't know them at the time. And they were both going to be here this morning, and neither one of them is here. But Dana was still here in song, and Christine is still here because I brought the rock that I got her in Italy with me to give to her this morning. So they are both still here, which is so interesting, because they were both instrumental in how I ended up here at Unity of Fredericksburg. So that's where I wanted to start, was the beginning of the journey. So I came across Unity in Savannah because I was working at a homeless shelter for people who were HIV positive in Savannah, and we had care teams for some of our clients, and they were mostly faith-based communities that helped us with these teams. And Reverend Margie Grounds, who was the minister at Unity in Savannah, was on one of those teams. And there was just something about her and the way she lived and the things that she said that caught my attention. And so we tried out the Unity Church there. I was not ready enough to want to become a member or to attend on a regular basis, which was fine. And then we moved to Fredericksburg. And once I got here, and I decided, well, maybe I'll look into the Unity Church here. And when I first started looking, there wasn't one. So I wrote to Margie and said, hey, you should come up to Fredericksburg and start a Unity Church. And she wrote back and said, no, that's not happening. But you actually should connect with my friends Christine and Dana, who just moved from Savannah to Fredericksburg, just like we had. I was like, well, that's interesting. So I got in touch with Christine, and that in itself is a whole nother talk about the journey that we've taken together and the learning, the discovering of the heartmate that I found in Christine. But so I got in touch with her and I said, hey, Margie pointed me in your direction. Is there a church starting? And she said yes, and she told me we were meeting at M&S and we were going to meet up, and I said, but, so how will I recognize you when I get there? She said, well, I have long dark hair, it's curly, I'm Italian, I'm from Jersey. I was like, that's me. So we recognized each other right away when we got there. And that was the beginning, as they say in Casablanca, of a beautiful friendship. So that was the beginning of my contact with Unity in a real sort of consistent way, was with this spiritual community. And most people, when they are on this journey through Unity, they read books, they go to classes, they do all these things where you're studying the principles and you're learning more about them. And for me, it happened in a different way. I took some classes and I read books. But for me, it turned out that I learned the most about them through writing, through this process of conversation with God and with my soul, myself. Which for me was completely foreign because being raised Catholic, you didn't talk to God yourself. That wasn't something you did, at least not in the Catholic upbringing that I had. It's different now for some people. So that was a completely foreign concept to me. Thank you to Neil Donald Walsh for Conversations with God, which sort of gave me permission to have those conversations myself. But writing was not something that I did at the time. And so the whole process of learning this way was new to me and a mystery to me. And this family was so instrumental in me coming to terms with that, understanding that, and taking the tiniest baby steps to sharing that. So I'm so grateful to all of you for helping me come to that joy, because for me it is this incredible joy. And so I wanted to look at, when I started thinking about this talk, the process I went through in learning these principles through writing, through poetry. And it was ridiculous, amazing, incredible to go back to the beginning of my writings and look at them and watch the progression that I had made. The beginnings, who was I just telling this morning, Amy, that the first stuff I was reading was really just crap. I mean, it was just terrible, the stuff that I had written. And there was a lot of angst, and there was a lot of anger at God, and a lot of trying to figure things out, like really trying hard to figure them out. And it was just terrible. But, that's how it starts. You stumble, you fall, you try and figure things out. And I was amazed when I looked, especially if I picked one poem from each of the collections, to look at the progression in terms of specific principles. And I was so grateful for that process and for how gentle it was for me to do it that way, and how natural it was for me to do it that way, and so natural that I didn't even really know that's what I was doing. It's not like I sat down and go, okay, I'm going to write about principle 2 today. I just wrote about what I was working on at the time, and as I look back, I can see very clearly the principles as I was going through them. And in preparing for this, I really came to discover that there's no way that I can do all 5 of the principles and represent them with poems in the time that I have. So I'm not going to get through all 5 of them. Maybe I'll do another talk another time. So I think I'm going to get through 3. We'll see how it goes. But I did bring copies of the poems that I'm going to use this morning, or at least reference, so that we can make more copies if we want, and you can take them with you. So, because Christine told me to do that. So there you go. Thank you, Christine. So beginning, I'm not going to go in order either. So I'm going to start with the song, Our Thoughts Are Prayers. So I'm going to start with principle 3, which is we create our life experiences through our way of thinking, because that was the first one that called to me, but also because that was the one I resisted the most. I really didn't like that idea. I really didn't like the responsibility that I thought came with that idea, that I'm creating my life. No, someone else over here did that. That wasn't me. How could I be experiencing this? I didn't want this. So I really struggled and went round and round and round and round about that one. And yet, when I really sat with it, because when I heard that song, I knew it was true the first time I heard that song. And so when I really sat with it, there really was great freedom in that idea of creating my own life, creating my own experience. So it was an interesting progression of resistance, absolute resistance, to getting to the point of this is actually really freeing. And so the 3 poems that I pulled for that principle in particular are called The Corner of Trust and Doubt, The Fork, and The Whirlwind and the Kiva. I think I'm just going to read the first and the third. The Corner of Trust and Doubt really, for me, represents that resistance that I felt to that at that time, because I felt this great sense of responsibility. And it shifts even within a little bit, within the poem itself, to freedom rather than responsibility, that this is something that's liberating, not really something that's as heavy as it seems at first to me. So this was a process of seeing what I needed to do, resisting, and looking at surrendering to it. It's called The Corner of Trust and Doubt. I stand at the corner of trust and doubt. To my right, the road rises to the crest of a hill. I cannot see where the road goes beyond the peak. Behind me, the road leads back the way I came, familiar and comfortable, yet only sadness lives down that path. To choose the path to trust, I must walk alone. To choose doubt, I walk surrounded by my demons. I no longer fear them, for they are old friends. They tug at my hands to pull me toward doubt. They laugh and say we'll do nothing but play on our way. Yet I know that to be a lie, for those demons cannot speak truth. They have never been down that road. I know clearly that behind me lie only tears and fears. Still, the familiarity of a pain I know draws me away from what I do not know. Great joy could lie on the road to trust, or great pain I simply don't know. I believe that trust leads to the land of truth, yet I remain here in the land of indecision. Around me lay the bones of many who came before me, all trapped by fear. Their bones bleached by the sun that shines so brightly from the land of truth. By that light, I can see my doubts clearly. I see plainly the path that led me to this place, this moment, this choice. But it's too bright, the light of truth. It reveals too much. Now I know why the bones lie at my feet. They, like I, once stood here transfixed by the glare of truth and the lies it illuminates. I am paralyzed by the realization that the lies are of my own making. I created the road that led me here. I paved it with pain and isolation. I laid the asphalt on the road of doubt and trudged every mile of it, reveling in what I had created. Yet finally, somehow, truth intersected my path of doubt. As I stand now with truth revealed before me, I turn and look back. My shadow is there behind me, stretching backwards toward doubt. I feel its pull. I see my demons lurking in it, trying to keep out of the light. The bones of my ancestors around me, the shadow of my doubt behind me. I take a step forward. One step at a time, I make my way to the peak of trust, not knowing what lies over the hill in the land of truth, yet with each step on the path of trust, finding I don't need to know. So that's where I sort of began, exploring the principles. And you can clearly hear my confusion and my resistance, I think, in that poem. The fork, which I don't think I'll have time to read that one too, but was really about reaching that point of choosing. Okay, so I see the choice before me at this crossroads of trust and doubt, and now I know I have to make the choice. And pausing in that moment to make that choice, and seeing that not only is it a point of no return once I make that choice, but it also impacts all the people behind me when I make that choice. Every choice to live your heart and to live and to love brings other people with you, just like the people before me who made that choice brought me with them. That one step closer. So the fork, if you want a copy of that one later. The next one is the whirlwind and the kiva, which was such an interesting process for me. It's about this ring. This ring has the symbol of the whirlwind and the kiva. It's a Hopi ring that I bought on a trip to Colorado. This trip to Colorado was breathtaking for me. It was another practice of learning to trust what I heard, and I did this ceremony in the desert, in the middle of the night, by myself, with eyes glowing in the distance. It made me just a little bit nervous. But there were two dogs that came with me of the people that I was staying with. One stopped at one point because he wouldn't go any further, but the other one came and just sat outside the circle I had drawn and waited for me the whole time. And this process, as it turned out, I didn't know what it was going into it. I just trusted that everything I needed would be there. Was a marriage, a union of the two parts of myself, this human and this divine. And it was a wedding of those two things. And I had bought this ring while I was there, but I hadn't put it on yet until after I did the ceremony. And I realized afterwards that I couldn't put it on until after I had joined these two things. And I didn't have a wedding ring at the time. I didn't know Bill at the time. So I put it on my ring finger. Once I was done the ceremony, I joined these two parts of myself. And I knew that was a commitment I was making. And the symbols, the whirlwind and the kiva, if you don't know, is a sacred space that in Native American tradition, you go underground into this sacred space for ritual, for ceremony. And the whirlwind for me represents that swirling, that human part that's very challenging sometimes with all the swirling. And so the ring was this constant physical reminder to me that I could any time go into that sacred space within myself, no matter what was swirling. And so the poem itself, years later, before I wrote anything about it, was about, in relation to this principle, was about seeing things differently, that in creating my life, I can choose how I want to define my experiences. And this poem is about looking at what we would call wounds and looking at them differently and seeing them differently and claiming that freedom, and I get to define it for myself. So this is the whirlwind and the kiva. Sanctuary, sanctuary. She calls the word over and over, as if invoking some ancient rite, claiming a safe passage. Then, gingerly, one rung at a time, she descends from the whirlwind above to the sacred space below. It is a space where the whirlwind's energy cannot reach her, a space of stillness and reflection, where there are no wounds, only memories of them. There, in that safe, sacred place, she pulls out the memory of each wound and looks at it differently. She places each one, great and small, upon the sacred healing earth before her bare feet. She stoops and traces her finger along each memory of harm or loss. Some shimmer, some are dark with shadow. From a pocket, she draws a single candle and a wooden match. With gentleness, she strikes the match and awakens light in the candle. She sets the flame amid the wounds and steps back. The flickering light illuminates her odd smile. Upon the floor, the scars have come together to form a perfect circle, a glimmering light at its core. Rather than a tragic autobiography, she finds instead a revealing self-portrait. She steps within the circle and kneels. The distant, howling whirlwind takes up the call. Sanctuary. So for me, that was a real transition from this place where I'm in doubt of even if I want to take a step forward to a place where I can take these things that I see as hurt and harm and transform them for myself, depending on how I see them. I can create my experience any way I want. And of course, eventually I wrote a whole book about how we create our lives. So this is a really important principle for me and coming to learn to live it. And really what I needed to say right at the beginning is that I consider myself very much a life in progress. So the process that I've gone through and the progress that I have made is still in motion. I have not, I'm still challenged on a daily basis to really fully live into these principles. But that's my goal, and I'm working towards it, and I'm always learning more. So the second one I want to go with is the second principle. Human beings are created in the image of God, and our very essence is divine. Therefore, we are all inherently good. There are 3 poems I picked for this, and really for me, this principle was about learning to bear witness to the divine within myself and coming to terms with that and what that meant and what that looked like and, is that really true? The first one I chose, which you've all heard before, so I'm going to skip this one, but is This Small Life. Because for me, that was my first glimpse of that divinity within myself. And not only a glimpse of it, but a realization that if I let it shine brighter, it goes out before me and it makes ripples. And I really explored ripples a lot. But it will touch other people as it moves out from me. And again, it's sort of related to the third principle of we create our experiences. What do I want to create? What do I want to send out before me? And that's when I really started focusing on peace, too, is what I want to send out before me is peace. I want that to touch other people. But it was a realization that I could also touch other people with that divine light within myself. But my first inkling with it, or my first debate about it in that poem was that it's very small, this light, It's not going to change anything, this little tiny light inside myself. But then when I came to terms with, but wait, if that little tiny light is actually really divine, if that's God, then why wouldn't it change things, right? So that was sort of the transformation of that poem. But even though I could see that right from the beginning, I still struggled a lot with this concept of owning that divinity within myself. And so the next poem is Petals Opening, which was part of that resistance to the divine within myself and learning to open to it. And was inspired by the picture of a peony, actually. But this was actually a conversation that I had with God. And he won. Petals Opening. He said, "Come here." I said, "No." He said, "Let me see you." I hid my beauty. He said, "I will tell you of yourself." I would not hear. He said, be one with me. I stood alone. He smiled upon me. I looked at him. He loved me. I dared feel his love. He held me. I let myself be held. He knew my heart. I shared it with him freely. He saw all of me. I opened to be seen. So yeah, I think God won that conversation, that round. And that was what it was about, with that divinity within myself, discovering it and really being open to it, to seeing it myself, but to letting others see it too. And to see God, seeing his reflection in myself too. So that was a really interesting and fun process. The other poem, and Amy, I'm glad you're here for this because of this one. I'm not going to read all of it because it's long. It's called Beyond the Veil. And it was a moment of surrender, quite literally, to the fog. I was sitting out on a balcony. It was a beautiful sunny day. I was looking at the water. And all of a sudden, everything changed. The wind changed, the fog rolled in, the sun went away, and I wanted to retreat. I was like, okay, I'm going to go inside where it's warmer and not so foggy. And something just made me stay. So I stayed. And the first part of the poem is about that resistance, about that fight, about I'm going to retreat, but no, I'm not really going to retreat. I'll stay, even though it's uncomfortable. And so this poem was really about surrendering to that moment of clarity about myself. And you sometimes have to sit in the fog where it's really uncomfortable, and yet what comes from that is so beautiful. And so what I ended up doing was asking myself this question as I was sitting in the fog. It was a very in-the-moment sort of thing. And I'm going to start in the middle of the poem, like I said, because it's long. But it's after I've decided to just remain in the fog and see what happens. So it's a conversation, sort of, with outside of myself. I asked her, what do you find there when you look deep within? When you sit within the stillness, what do you find? In a choked voice, no more than a whisper, she told me, I find a heart without walls that is simply light and love in shimmering fluid form. I find peace that is beyond my understanding. I find joy overflowing. I find a capacity to love that I am not able to explain in words. I find God with a gentle voice and a radiant light. I find the pathways of time stretching out beyond my sight into unknown realms. I find knowing, a deep knowing that flows directly from the collective one that we are all an expression of. A knowing that provides all with all we need, with all the answers that are unanswerable and that have no need of answers. I find light and song, sounds that I have not heard upon the earth, and yet that I carry in my heart every moment. Songs without words or music, and yet they are clearly songs. I hear my own voice within the harmony of the song. I find laughter and tears and realize they are my own. The tears that I have cried for all are here, and they float like droplets of starlight amid the cosmos. The joy that has spilled over in laughter is here too. It bounces like a pinball off the stars, making the universe echo with laughter. I see all that I have felt and cried and screamed and sang and laughed, all here, turned into light. The light that helps illuminate the universe. I see that there are no boundaries. There are no edges, that I naturally flow into all, and all flows into and through me. I see that we don't exist separately, but as one fluid expression of love. That even if love becomes stagnant in the human form, when we believe that our artificial boundaries can truly separate us, eventually love will flow like water does, beyond any boundary or wall, and rejoin the flow. From here I can see this within myself. I can see the radiance that I am. I can see with eyes of compassion and love the path that I have walked, the human doubts that have held me in a belief of limitation. I can see my radiant self as part of the one radiance, touching all in each moment, and I am overflowing with joy at the sight. From here, I can see beyond the veil. So that really was witnessing that divine within myself and knowing that there are those moments that you can see beyond the veil, that the human stuff is still going to be there, but if I can hold on to that memory of what's beyond that veil, then I'll be able to live more clearly that divinity. I feel like I'm going much too long. So the third one I wanted to cover, the third principle, was knowing these principles is not enough, our last principle. We must live the truth we know. And for me, it comes at the end anyway, because it's the hardest one. You have to really kind of know the other ones first before you can really live them. And that was always something that was, in relation to religion, an issue, a sticking point for me, was people talking about religion and quoting things to you, but not really trying to live that way. And that wasn't something I wanted to be or wanted to do. So I wanted to find a way to live that. And there's a big difference between knowing the principles and living them, as we all know. We've all had those moments of, I know I shouldn't do this or say this or think this or feel this, but I do anyway. And it's okay to have those moments of humanness. But there's this moment where you leap and you say yes to living those principles. And then, okay, all sorts of things come up for you to practice and to really see if you really meant that yes. And I really have reached the point finally, and I really probably shouldn't say it out loud, that I do feel like it's an opportunity more than putting the effing part before the opportunity. I really feel like it is an opportunity, that the things that come up that you can really learn from. And because of that, I think I don't have to learn them. It doesn't take as long to learn. I don't have to relearn them as many times, because you know how those lessons come up over and over again. So I don't have to go back to them as often. The more you're really trying to truly live into the principles, I think the better off you are in many ways. So there were three. Shedding my skin. Actually, there were four for this because I couldn't decide on the last one. Shedding my skin, knowing, and stretch marks. And there's a new one called My Love that I thought about using. But what shall I do? I think I will go ahead and read Shedding My Skin, and then we'll see if there's time for anything else. But because Shedding My Skin was about that fear of, okay, so if I live these principles, who will I be afterwards? What will I look like? I don't know what that looks like. And that was scary for me. And because I was a very different person when I started learning these principles, I didn't think anybody I knew would recognize me. And what would they think? What would my family think? That my mom thought if I walked into a church, it would fall down. That's where we were. And so if I started coming home being like, hey, I'm all spiritual, what is my family going to say? They're going to think that's ridiculous and not true. So it was this, I'm afraid of what I'll look like, and I don't know what I'm going to look like, so I don't know what it's going to feel like, and I don't know anything about it. So that's what this poem is about, shedding my skin. I lie in the sun. The light and heat on my skin makes me itch, makes me want to scratch it off, to shed my skin. I rub against a rock to peel it away. It's natural, right, to shed your skin? Then why am I afraid? Afraid of what I will look like, naked there in the light. Will I be different or the same? There will be a change. That's what the process is about. Growing, shedding the old me. How many times must I shed before I get to the real me? The snake is not afraid. He knows it's natural to become something new and yet the same. Maybe next time it will be easier and I will not be afraid. Maybe each time I move closer to me. The layers are many. What then when the last layer is cast off? I will become the light rather than lie in it. I will be home. I will no longer be afraid to shed my skin. I will no longer need it to protect me. I will no longer need it. I will move on without my skin. So that skin was the old me, and I stand before you here today as this new version of me. Many layers have been shed in your company and with your help. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And I can't even begin to express the depth of my gratitude for that, because I really have learned so much about living these principles and embodying them in the way that I had hoped to, and the way I'm still striving to every day. But it wouldn't have happened without this community. So as we stand at this point of transition, I want you to know the gratitude I carry with you. I want you to know how much you each have helped move one life forward. And that's really what we're about, I think, is helping us each move lives forward, more towards the heart, more towards living from that place of spirit and divinity within ourselves. And that's what we need to hold on to as we move forward. So thank you very much.